Last season, the Cleveland Guardians had one of the most exciting seasons in 2022. Not many expected this young core to make it to the playoffs, let alone win the AL Central. Does it happen again in 2023? Quincy Wheeler joins me yet again for another team preview here at the Route Report edition of OK Baseball. And hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Route Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast. Another team preview as we continue on with covering every single team before opening day. And with me today, Quincy Wheeler joins me from his own Guardians Fancast podcast, and now a writer for covering the corner as well. We're going to talk to Cleveland Guardians. Quincy, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back on, Christian.
I'm really looking forward to talking about this episode today. The Cleveland Guardians had an exciting season last year. Let's start there. Let's go back to 2022, 92-70. Just remembering the preview we had last year, yes, the expectations were pretty high, but I don't think they were that high last year. We kind of had that question mark of they could finish anywhere from second to fifth at some point. Never really had that conversation of could they win the AL Central. Well, they shocked us. They completely shocked us, and they got a long way. 92 wins. Take me back in your perspective of covering the Guardians and how they were in 2022.
Yeah, you said it well. It was exciting and surprising to see them get first in the division. I think part of it required the White Sox to collapse a little bit. I think even still going back, I would have clearly said the White Sox had the talent advantage on paper, but the White Sox made a pretty terrible hire in their manager. So that kind of played into it. And then they had some injury issues and some guys underperformed. And that gave the Guardians an opportunity to take advantage. And they did. And the Guardians did that in head-to-head matchups with the White Sox over and over. Whenever it seemed like, oh, this is going to be a big series, the Guardians would go to the mat with the White Sox and come out victorious majority of the times, which was a great thing to see with the young team. Obviously, one of the things that you'll hear the most about the Guardians is that last year they had the youngest team in baseball, but also that team was younger than the average AAA ball club. So that's a super young team. And obviously Guardians fans are excited to see how well they performed as a unit last year and excited about what they can produce in the future. At every point that you looked at last season, when you needed a young player to step up and provide something that the offense was lacking, or that, even defensively, they were able to do it. You were able to find when Jose Ramirez has tore his thumb, still managing to be somehow a major league average hitter and better after he tore his better than that after he tore his thumb. You had Oscar Gonzalez step up. You had at the end of the season, you had guys like Will Brennan coming in and providing some additional pump to the lineup. At every point that you needed a young player to step up, guys did, and that's how they ended up where they were.
Not only are they one of the youngest teams in all of baseball, one of the lowest payrolls as well, still finding a way to make the playoffs last year and win the AL Central. I have already said it on a few team previews this season that I am not going to predict the AL Central this year because I'm always completely wrong. That is such a wild card division to me. But I'm going to make you give a prediction later on at the end of this show. So I'm going to throw you on the hot spot. So sorry, but it's all you on this one. Yeah. Jose Ramirez, I'm glad you brought him up in 2022. When are we going to finally hear the fact that this guy is no longer a player not to be mentioned in some kind of conversations? Everybody seems to always forget him in top 10 conversations. Jose Ramirez deserves to be there, but when does that finally stop?
Yeah, any measure you look at least for advanced stats, Jose Ramirez is a top 5 player in baseball. It depends on where you put him inside the list, but top 5 somewhere. I don't know quite what to say about the underrated part of it, which I think is certainly true. I think part of it is because Jose does so many things well rather than one thing super well. If you were trying to pick out what the best thing that Jose Ramirez does, it would either be his plate discipline or his base running acumen. And both of those are absolutely elite skills, but he also has great power. He also has the ability to play really good defense to exceptional defense. So all those things play together to make him a super valuable player who, if he has a few more good years, can put himself on track to make the Hall of Fame. I think you're probably hoping that at some point Jose has one of these 30-30 or 40-40 seasons, and he's certainly capable of that. 40-40 would obviously, it would have to be either this season or next season before you'd assume age will catch up to him a little bit with stolen bases. I think a season like that would probably eliminate so much of the underrated talk, but a lot of it is that he plays in Cleveland. But Jose made that a priority in the offseason, saying, I'm going to take less money than I would get on the open market to stay here. And even now, looking at the numbers that went out this offseason to free agents, he took even less money than what we thought was possible. We thought originally he took maybe a $50 million pay cut to stay here, and they might have taken more like an $100 million pay cut to stay here. But he wants to be in Cleveland. He wants to win a World Series here. He wants to go to the Hall of Fame from here. That's what he said when he signed the contract, and it was his initiative that got it done. Props to the front office, props to Dolan, props to Dolan, the owner of the team, props to Jose's agent for all the work that they did. But it ultimately came down to Jose saying, I want to stay in Cleveland. And Cleveland fans can't help but love him with our heart and soul because of that.
Yeah, it's a great couple between Cleveland and Ramirez. You can definitely tell the love between those two right there. I see it across social media all the time. I mean, I know maybe it's my bias because I do follow a lot of Cleveland sports Twitter, social media personalities, if you will, yourself included, because you guys always put out great content. However, I don't think that's the case. I think he deserves to be in that conversation, and I always get upset when I don't see him there. Now, you talk about this 2022 season. I'm going to ask you at the end, do you think they can repeat and get back into the playoffs and maybe even win the AL Central in 2023? But the way that they did this in the offseason, they did add some more supporting cast. Josh Bell really comes to mind, coming over from San Diego. They also add Mike Zunino to be your catcher after losing Austin Hedges. Austin Hedges, obviously a great defensive catcher, but you get Mike Zunino, who had some great years in Tampa when healthy. Now, I think that you could say the same thing about Josh Bell as well. What do you think about adding these guys, Josh Bell and Mike Zunino, into the mix?
I think that they're both good additions. The team had to do something in two areas. They had to add a guy who could swing it right-handed, who offers some more pop in the lineup to play first base, outfield, or DH, somewhere in there. And they had to add a catcher. Guardians fans would all have told you going into the offseason, well, maybe not all, but most of them would tell you that they wanted Sean Murphy from the Oakland Athletics. That was the big hope, to pull off a trade for Sean Murphy. Everybody should want Sean Murphy on their team because of how excellent he is as a defender as well as a hitter. That didn't happen. That's kind of a disappointment. The next best available option was likely Mike Zunino. As far as being an excellent defensive catcher, he doesn't have great blocking stats, but he's good at controlling base running. He's good at framing. Hopefully that shoulder is back to where it needs to be, and the base running control is where it needs to be. And he is able to connect with the staff like he needs to be the pitch caller that he needs to. But I think he's about as good of a bet as you can find outside of someone like Sean Murphy. The other thing he offers is a little more upside. I should say a lot more upside than Austin Hedges, and probably a little better baseline than what Austin Hedges did offensively, because Mike Zunino can hit home runs and hits a lot of home runs when he's able to connect with the ball. That's always the issue. Austin Hedges also had issues connecting with the ball, rarely would hit that home run. Mike Zunino, when he connects, typically has hit home runs. So I think that's kind of the goal for the team, is to find that portion of Mike Zunino's game where when he connects, it goes a long way. And that provides for the fact, makes up for the fact that he's probably going to hit somewhere around the Mendoza line. If he can do that, hit some homers and control the base running and help the pitching staff, as similar to what Austin Hedges did as a great framer, then that'll be a super great addition. Josh Bell, obviously, I think that was probably the best realistic option for the team, except for maybe Jose Abreu. But I think you could make an argument either way. Abreu being a little bit older, Abreu would have cost the team more. Supposedly they were really in on him and maybe finished second in that race. And you can see how Abreu and his contact approach and the clubhouse presence he provide would fit very well in the Guardians. But the second option, really the next best option, was Josh Bell, and they got that done. So credit to them for that. I think as a Guardians fan, I wish they'd gone maybe one step further. Wish they would have said, let's do whatever it takes to beat the Twins for Pablo Lopez in a trade. You don't know how those conversations went, if they were even in the room for those conversations, if there was anything the Marlins wanted that they could have provided to be up to Luis Ariz. Would it have cost you Stephen Kwan? Would you want to do that? Probably not. Maybe there's not enough minor league free agents and other guys to compensate for that. But it's tough to see a pitcher like that go to your main division rival. I think the biggest miss for me is I just don't understand why they didn't sign Andrew Chafin, who was a great left-handed reliever who signed for $6.5 million. Truly, being a guy who's from Ohio, that he could have signed for the team for something similar to that and would have lengthened their bullpen. But when the biggest miss of the offseason is maybe not signing a veteran reliever that you could have signed, it's a pretty good offseason. So they at least get a solid B plus from me.
Yeah, I mean, compared to last season when you didn't really see any signings whatsoever until I think last week of spring training. I think there was one signing, if I remember correctly. It was nothing huge, but
last year it was Brian Shaw.
That's right. That's what it was.
and Luke Maile, he came along, I think, right before the lockout happened. So Luke Maile and Brian Shaw last offseason, and then this offseason, Josh Bell and Mike Zunino. That's a pretty huge upgrade. So we can't complain too much.
That's true. Well, at the beginning of last season, Stephen Kwan obviously went all out, and there was definitely a time where he was just all over the socials, all over MLB.com. Cooled off a little bit, but still seems to be a solid player that's going to be in your lineup for looks like a couple of years, at least for years to come, if he stays a Cleveland Guardian. Do you believe in the sophomore slump, though? That's what I always like to ask people after outstanding rookie year. What's your thoughts on something like a sophomore slump?
I guess I would say that the sophomore slump, I mean, it's a concept that exists because it always takes time for young players to adjust. And as the league adjusts to them and gets more data, they have to make further adjustments. So the question is, how quickly will they make those adjustments? And that's why you typically see a downturn. Maybe not even typically. That's why sometimes you can see a downturn in a player's second year. I do think that Kwan is well suited to handle a sophomore slump. He showed that a good bit last year. You kind of mentioned his numbers. He had an insane April, and then May was terrible. May, he had, I think, somewhere around like a 50 WRC plus. It was really, really tough for him in May. But then if you look at everything else, if you look at April, June through the end of the season, he's got a WRC plus up over 130. And I think that kind of shows you that May was the league saying, okay, we have a book on you to some extent. Here's what we're going to try. And Kwan showed that he could figure that out and make it work and adjust on the fly. The ability that he has to not swing at pitches that are outside of the strike zone kind of gives him a floor that leads you to believe he's not really going to crater too far. And I think also part of the things that will help him is having a year under his belt, having a reputation where umpires know, hey, this guy knows where the strike zone is, should help him a little bit. He takes a lot of pitches, so that's primarily why he took more strikes that were outside the strike zone, called the strikes, than any other player in baseball by a good bit. But another portion of that is umpires getting the reputation that, hey, Kwan knows where the strike zone is. And I do think that'll help a little bit, that umpires will say, oh, hey, that probably isn't a ball because this guy didn't swing at it. You see that happen over the years with guys like Joey Votto and other guys who've got their reputation. Umpires start saying, okay, I can give them the benefit of the doubt, whether it's conscious or not. So I do think that'll help him a little bit. And I don't expect a big sophomore slump for him. In fact, I think his numbers could possibly improve towards the end of the season. The second half of the season, Kwan hit the majority of his homers. I think the first half of the season, he hit 2 and he hit 5 in the second half of the season, as he started to say, maybe I can load up on pitches a little earlier. Guys trying to get pitches across the zone early in that bat can load up on those. So I expect him to maybe hit for a little more power and have C plus a little over 120, 125, and a 4-win player.
I hope his power continues. And obviously, seeing his power at the end of the season, that's always a good thing to have. I don't want to see him cool off at all. Speaking of one conversation that does seem to have been cooled off from last season, though, is the shortstop position with Ahmed Rosario. I know at one point last season, we even wrote an article over on slashersports.com about potential landing spots where Ahmed Rosario might go. It seemed like he was the odd man out of the conversation and maybe on his way out of Cleveland. It doesn't seem to be the case anymore, at least from an outsider's perspective. Ahmed Rosario seems to kind of solidify himself back in that Cleveland lineup. What's your takeaway from Ahmed Rosario moving into 2023?
I think that Ahmed Rosario is such a fascinating player. If you dive into Guardians Twitter, it's always a touch point of immense controversy, people figuring out what they think about Ahmed and where they think he's headed and what the team should do with him. Ahmed Rosario is loved by the Cleveland Guardians organization for a couple different reasons. One, objectively speaking, he's got a high floor for a player because he's got immense speed. He led baseball by a healthy amount in competitive runs to first base, because if you watch Ahmed Rosario, he never takes a play off, whether on defense or hitting the ball. He is going out of the box as hard as any player has ever gone every time that he makes contact with the ball. And that is an immense value for a young team, because you look at an established player like that, a 27-year-old player like that, who's been in the league for a while, who's an immense prospect, who could take a playoff, and he never does. And these young players coming up in baseball say, I guess I can't take a playoff either. So when he and Jose react like that, when they're going first to third in every opportunity, when every play that they're out there, they're trying to take the extra base, they're trying to get first base no matter what, even on a little chopper in the hole, they're going as hard as they can to try to be out the throw from a shortstop. Young players say, we have to do that too. That's a lot of value for a young team that Ahmed provides. The other thing that's interesting about Ahmed Rosario is, coming into 2022, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I probably wasn't a huge fan of him playing shortstop because his numbers defensively look pretty terrible in advanced metrics for 2021 playing shortstop. Towards the end of the season, Ahmed changed up his stance. He entered more of an upright stance as balls would come in, and it seemed like it helped him a little bit. If you look at ultimate zone rating or defensive runs saved, he had an immensely better season defensively in 2022. If you look at outs above average, StatCast, it was about the same. It was poor. So it kind of depends on which metric you go by. By the eye test, I think Ahmed was better. The issue that he has is range, and we'll see how the shift taking some of that away from him, where Jimenez could help or even Jose could help. He has to play a little more in the normal shortstop spot. We'll see how he handles that. But I suspect he's going to play solid to good defense for them at shortstop, and he's going to provide that league average bat. He's going to hit in the second spot in the lineup, which isn't ideal, but he hits there because Tito knows he's not going to let the pressure of having Jose Ramirez hit behind him get to him, and he's going to set the example for everyone else in the lineup that every time we're up there, we go as hard as we can. The one thing I'd say that I just wish that Ahmed could hang out and not swing at those sliders low in the zone. That's the big thing. Last year, there was a huge uptick of pitchers throwing Ahmed sliders down and away, especially when he was behind in the count. And he virtually always swings at those and strikes out or makes poor contact. Again and again, they're going to go after him there. So if the team and Ahmed could just not swing at a few more of those, that kind of incremental change could make a big difference for him and help him get to a big payday off season. I don't think there's any extension coming with the Guardians, but he's probably the best shortstop in next year's class and about the only one out there. So he should get a good deal from somebody.
That's interesting. Make it or break it year for Rosario. All right. Well, we're right in the middle of spring training, and now we're just 2 weeks, just over 2 weeks from opening day. What have you seen so far in spring training from the Guardians, and what's the biggest position battle that you'd say that is taking place on the major league roster? What's one that's really catching your eye?
Yeah, the spring training's been great. It's always hard to come to any firm conclusions about anybody from spring training because you never know exactly what they're working on when they go in the game, especially from a pitching standpoint. And then even hitters, depends on who they're facing, the quality of their competition. Will Brennan's really opened up some eyes. If folks haven't heard about Will Brennan, he's another contact first outfielder that's coming up, left-handed hitter, a little bit in the mold of Quan, kind of Quan light to some degree, but doesn't strike out much, is able to take a walk, makes a lot of contact, probably has a little more power, so that's kind of nice. He's definitely been hitting well. Gabriel Arias, He's another prospect who's coming up who plays shortstop. He can also play pretty much anywhere else in the field, maybe except catcher and pitcher. He can play any other position. Expect to see him fill in for Jose whenever Jose takes a day at DH, which he did quite a bit last season. So I'd expect 1 day a week Arias will play third. He may spell Josh Naylor at first base, and he's hit very well this spring training. So those are a couple names that have opened up some eyes. Pitching wise, it's been a little bit difficult with injuries. Cody Morris, Daniel Espino, Sam Hinches, all having issues with shoulders. So figuring out what's going to go on with those guys and hopefully they get healthy has been the main negative of spring training. But the Guardians are pretty good about figuring out how to get the most out of the arms that they have. So it feels like that should end up turning out pretty well. I think the most interesting position battle for the team is for that 13th position player. The bullpen, there's some uncertainty there, but it's for that maybe 7th or 8th bullpen arm. So there's not a huge, I don't think there's a lot of huge feeling about which one it has to be there. But it'll be interesting to see who makes that last roster spot. Will they add Roman Quinn? Keep hearing the team really likes Roman Quinn, but Roman Quinn is pretty much just a base running defensive replacement. Maybe it's something they try to do to take advantage of the new base stealing rules to maybe get a little more out of that position there. Could it be Tyler Freeman, another prospect who plays shortstop and second base and third base and is a right-handed hitter, makes a lot of contact? Could that be somebody who makes the team? Or could it be a real surprise like a David Fry who plays catcher, third base, first base, maybe even some outfield? He's not on the 40-man, so that's less likely, as with Roman Quinn, that he'll get added. But he's certainly played well in the spring training, and having that ability to be a third catcher would be an interesting way for them to go. Richie Palacios is the one that I think probably makes it in that spot just because that's where he kind of is in the lineup of things. Provides them a 5th left-handed hitter of the 13. They have 6 right-handers and 4 left-handers and 2 switch hitters, so another left-hander kind of makes sense there. That's where I expect it to go, but it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, left-handers are going to be at a premium this year with all that shift restriction. I'm excited to see how teams handle that and what the lineups look like moving forward this season. The rotation, well, when we talk about Cleveland's rotation, I've always been super impressed by Cleveland's arms in the last decade, if you will, and especially when you look at this one. With the exception of Cal Quantrill, every single one of those pitchers came homegrown from Cleveland. And I mean, even Cal was traded couple of years ago from San Diego, but obviously did a lot of buildup in the Guardian system. Shane Bieber, Tristan McKenzie, Aaron Savali, Zach Plesac, all of those homegrown Cleveland pitchers. Gotta love that. This rotation always seems like a strong point at the beginning of the season. Do you think that'll be the same case moving forward in 2023?
Yeah, it should be a strength for the team. Some of the guys have had some issues throwing strikes in spring training. You never know, like I said, what to make of that, whether it's guys just working on stuff. Cal Quantrill's trying to add a strikeout pitch, so that can sometimes mess with your control a little bit as you figure out the movement of that. But it would be big for him to be able to get some more strikeouts. That's his main issue, is he has trouble getting a strikeout when he really needs one. So that's something they've been working on. I expect that if Aaron Savali is healthy, that he can be a huge asset to the Guardians. Last year, he had career highs for strikeouts and career lows for walks, which is always a great thing to see. He throws a bazillion different pitches. He's a super cerebral guy. So you can, if he's healthy, then that would be a big deal for them as far as figuring out the rotation and getting the most out of them. That 5th spot in the rotation with Zach Plesac is a point of frustration for Guardians fans. Plesac has trouble staying healthy, kind of his own issues there. But he knows how to throw strikes and he plays great defense. If he can do that, then he should be adequate in that 5th starter role. But there's a lot of depth to the organization, as you mentioned. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those guys that we talk about as coming up for the Guardians, even the guys that you saw last season, Connor Pilkington, Hunter Gaddis, Xavier Curry, they might get some starts in that 5th starter role. It's most exciting to see the growth that Tristan McKenzie will experience in the coming year. Hopefully he takes the next steps. He had some really exciting games at the end of the year, including in the playoffs. And then we'll see if Shane Bieber maybe gains a little velocity another year removed from his shoulder surgery that he had. His velocity was down last year and he figured out how to be dominant despite diminished velocity. So if he can gain another tick or two on the fastball, watch out. You could have another Cy Young campaign.
I'm glad that you brought up the prospects, helping me transition our way into that conversation. MLB TV is giving away the minor league package for free this year. So I'm encouraging everyone who's watching the team previews on the Route Report to get more into minor league baseball, because it's absolutely fun. And I know I don't have to tell that to you, Quincy, but it's just a great thing to pay attention to. Minor league baseball gets it done the right ways. With that being said, Cleveland is one of those fun organizations to pay attention to, from low A all the way to triple A. Who are a couple people you have your eye on, maybe making a possible major league debut this year, or just someone deep in the system that you think needs to be on others' radar?
Yeah, great question. The Guardians have three pitchers that everybody should know: Tanner Bybee, Gavin Williams, and Daniel Espino. As I mentioned, Espino's hurt, so we'll kind of see what's going on with his shoulder situation. But I would expect that you'll see Bybee or Williams up with the team at some point if they continue to pitch as they pitched in 2022. And these are guys that have number 2, number 3 starting potential, maybe number 1 if you really squint. Bybee opened eyes last season by throwing 97 miles an hour, sitting 97 miles an hour. Up till then, they hadn't really thought that he was much more than a 93 kind of guy. So finding that extra velocity was a big deal for him, and his stuff moves really well. That's a name to keep in mind. Of course, the Guardians are full of shortstop prospects. They constantly are adding shortstop prospects. Juan Brito they added in the offseason from Colorado, and he's a guy who doesn't strike out, takes his walks all the time. Those kind of guys they're filling the systems with. But I think I would say Angel Martinez is one to keep in mind. He had a real breakout year last season. He's a switch hitter. He's built like a tank and looks like the kind of guy that they could possibly move to left field or right field if they need to. And he's had a really good spring. I would watch him because that could be the kind of guy who comes up and helps him at some point, because you can always fit a switch hitter in the lineup and maybe just one more deep cut. Guardians are great at developing pitchers. They're always finding extra value. Keep an eye on Justin Campbell, who they drafted last year. There's a lot of potential there for them to get the most out of him and have him be a guy who's rising up the prospect list in the coming year.
That's my favorite segment of these team previews. I've been making a list of all the prospects that everybody is saying, and can't wait to pay attention to them all this year. We'll have to meet up later on in the season and see if those watch lists are actually something that really pan out. All right, Quincy, we're at the moment now. 2023 predictions for the Cleveland Guardians. Last season, AL Central winners, they made it to the playoffs, 92-70. Last season, you're only going to have the AL Central for 13 games instead of what we saw last season. What does Cleveland have to do to win the AL Central in 2023?
I think the main thing is, of course, to stay healthy. That's true for everyone. It's to not lose the drive of, we got to prove ourselves. We got to surpass expectations, having won the division. I think that Terry Francona is a big portion of that. His teams typically don't lose that drive. They just never give up. They find the extra spark they need, and they've got guys on the team who can lead them in that. I also think that it's going to require probably a trade in the middle of the season. We have so many prospects and a lot of guys playing middle infield positions. Fans have always been wondering, when are they going to consolidate some of this middle infield talent? I suspect that this is the season for it to happen, as the Guardians did in 2016 and 2017. They consolidated prospects. They spent some extra money to fill roster holes. When you come to July, there's going to be a roster hole somewhere, whether it's because of an injury or if it's one of the pitchers isn't quite up to snuff. Maybe they need some extra pop in the lineup. They don't have a ton of power in the lineup. The Guardians should make a trade in the summer to add and help fill those roster holes. And I think that will be enough to push them over the top.
I love that. All right. So are you predicting Cleveland wins the AL Central in 2023? And at 92 wins last season, will they go over 92 and a half win total, over under for this upcoming season?
I think I would go slightly under the 92 wins. I think it'll probably be somewhere around 89 or 90, but I do think that'll be enough to win the division. The Twins are good. The Twins have a lot of talent. So much of the Twins' talent is wrapped up in guys who have a pretty lengthy injury history. I love the Pablo Lopez move for them, but I don't I don't think I would probably bet on them having enough, but certainly if everyone stays healthy, they've got enough what it takes to win the division. But I do think the Guardians will end up winning the division somewhere around 89, 90 wins.
All right, fantastic. Love to hear that. What you got coming up on Covering the Corner and the Guardians Fancast podcast this week?
Well, I appreciate you mentioned both of those things. Covering the Corner is a great little site for Guardians fans to check out. Every day we're putting out articles about the team. I write a couple articles a week, analysis and editorials of the team. We're working on over-unders for players. We're working on wrapping up spring training with season previews. And we'll do things like talk about why Miles Straw might be the next Gerard Dyson for the Guardians, just making comparisons like that. And sometimes we just do fun stuff that just exercise our creative side. So I really appreciate the site. It's a great community for Guardians fans. I run the Guardians Fancast. During the season, I do 5 days a week. Over the last offseason, I did roughly that as well. This offseason, we had a newborn, so I've taken off more times for that. But coming into the season, I'll give a little 15 to 20-minute update 5 days a week. So you'll get to kind of hear my thoughts about what's going on with the team. And we'll talk to other Guardians fans. That's what I love to do, is talk to Guardians fans about their thoughts and their feelings about the team, do creative stuff together. So if you're interested in that, check out the podcast. And that's just something I do in my spare time. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And all that stuff will be down in the episode description below, especially also your Twitter, because you put out a lot of good just conversations, good discussions on your Twitter, and you can find that at Quincy Wheeler 1. That's going to wrap it up here at the Route Report at the OK Baseball podcast. Thank you, Quincy, yet again for joining me for this team preview. We got to do it again. We're going to have to meet up maybe late April, May, get a pulse check of these Guardians. Let's see if they start hot, just like you think a Terry's team will do. We'll be back here with another episode soon as we get ready to continue this 30-day preview. We are only a few weeks away from opening day. So until then, we'll see you back here next time. Take care.